Hey guys, Lucas here today for another little session with my RICOH GR II. Now everybody knows this is the premier street photography camera. I use it for street photography all the time, street. But today I want to do some urban landscape shooting, something different. Because honestly, this is a good camera for all kinds of stuff, and it's a little bit underrated for things like urban landscape, cityscapes. I do that kind of shooting all the time, and in many ways the RICOH has some useful advantages for that. Now, why do I say that? Well, first of all, it's small, so it's actually kind of easy to brace it on things and basically have a tripod without the need of carrying an actual tripod, because who in their right mind carries a tripod with the RICOH GR, because this is such a small nifty camera, fits in your pocket, and then you're going to weigh yourself down with a tripod? I don't do that. I think I've used this camera on a tripod once, yet despite that, I do pretty often do long exposure photos with it, urban landscape shots on pretty slow shutters. Because then you get a nice crisp, crystal clear, low noise shot, but without the use of a tripod. So we'll talk about some techniques for that, but first, please don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. I will answer any questions that come up in the comments, and especially any technical questions that you might have about the technique we're talking about today. Now, I very much profess using aperture mode with auto ISO. I often say that that's my preferred setting. It is. I like to use the max ISO, the min shutter speed. There's other videos that we've talked about that in more detail, but for shooting urban landscapes and cityscapes at night, I don't use this because it naturally drives the ISO up and you get more noise, and that's not what we're going for in these kinds of shots. We want things to be crystal clear, and because nothing's moving in the scene, it's okay to have a slow shutter speed. So I usually do these shots one of two ways. Either I put it on TAV, and then I choose the aperture that I want. Let's say I choose f4, not all the way open, but not too small, which is usually very sharp for most scenes with the lens in this camera, because the lens is only an 18mm lens, equivalent 28, but it's actually an 18, which means that it has tons of depth of field, even at pretty big apertures like f4. So I might go to f4, maybe 5.6, but let's say 4, and then I will choose a shutter speed, using, because I'm on TAV, so I'll choose a shutter speed, but I'll be watching the ISO, and then I'll try to get it down to what's comfortable. So I'll be lowering the shutter speed a 60th, a 30th, a 15th, and then I see that the ISO is going 800, 400, 200. Okay, 200 is fine. If I feel I can go lower, I'll go lower. So that's one way that I shoot. And the other way, of course, is to go fully manual. Just put it on M and choose all three settings. Sometimes it takes a little bit of tinkering and adjusting the settings just right, but I have the time, all the time in the world, because I'm shooting a landscape. It's not going anywhere. I can make mistakes, totally fine. In those cases, I usually put the ISO on 100. I put the aperture, as I already said, on 4, 5, 6, maybe 8, depending on the light. And then I use the shutter speed to get the exposure correct. And only if I realize, oh man, the shutter speed's going to like 30 seconds, and I don't know if I can hold the camera, even with my techniques that I'm going to teach, for 30 whole seconds, at that point I might say, okay, I'm going to raise the ISO from 100 to 200, and then my shutter speed would drop from 30 seconds to 15 seconds, right? So again, I'll do that either manually or in TAV, okay? So that's it for the settings. Focus, I usually just use auto. Snap focus is also okay. Fully manual focus is okay. It kind of doesn't matter, it's your preference, because again, subject's not going anywhere. You have all the time in the world to take your time and focus on things. Now, we're gonna go to a spot where the first place I wanna take you, I'm gonna teach you maybe a little bit more, I don't wanna say surprising, but a less obvious technique, okay? And then we'll go to a place where it's gonna be a little bit more obvious, but it'll still demonstrate the point, and we'll get some shots that show what you can do with this camera at night in the city. All right, so let's go to the first spot. So here we are, and I'm presented with this awesome view in Ikebukuro here, this little cafe that we know. And basically what I'm doing is I have the settings on fully manual. On a side note, I also have the focus on fully manual and set to infinity, so I don't have to worry about focusing at all. And then my settings are, as I already explained downstairs, I'm on f4 and 100 ISO and the shutter speed of 1 second. And I use complete manual settings for this. And by just bracing it against the window, maybe not every single shot, but if I'm really careful, many shots are completely sharp. right? So you see I'm kind of holding it in, I'm pushing it a little bit forward, and there we go, nice and sharp. Now every couple shots I might get a little bit of a blurry one, which is why usually once I'm kind of locked into my position, you know, I brace it in, I get everything just right, and then I take a few, right? So I just hold the shutter button down, right? There you go, I hold it down halfway, and then just press it all the way down a few times in a row, and then I'm more confident that I will get a nice and sharp photo. Perfect, that's great. And then from there, you know, I can mix up the composition, you know, I can hold it a little bit different, right? Something like this, right? And if I feel like, okay, 1 second is too slow and it's getting a little blurry, well then I can raise the ISO a little bit, right? I can either put the ISO on 200, that's going to give me in this case a half a second, okay, or I can put it on f2.8, and maybe then I can do a fourth of a second, and that's much more hand-holdable. Now, this is on the GR2. I don't have a GR3 just yet, but my understanding is that its stabilization is so good that people can hand-hold this at like 1 second, 2 seconds. I've heard all kinds of stuff. So, you know, the longer you can do it, the better. I still think even in those cases, it's good to have the glass to brace against. I think that's really useful. There's also the added benefit that when you're right up against the glass, then you don't get any reflections. That's very important, right? There we go, there we go. Eventually I got a sharp one. So there you go, the GR2, totally doable. GR3, apparently it's a little bit easier. Now one more thing, I'm gonna go back to 1 second and f4 and 100 ISO like I had. And then one more technique. So we're trying to keep the camera really steady, but actually, if I rotate the camera during the shot, that can make for some pretty slick shots. This is something fun that I like to do. So I just rotate while shooting. Very nice. Okay. So that's it. A couple fun ways you can do cityscapes with the RICOH, using it creatively, bracing it on things. There's a whole bunch of other materials here. There's like a mirror over here. A lot of things you can do when you're out shooting. So you want to think creative, how to brace and position or move your camera, especially when you don't have a tripod handy, which if you're shooting with this, you're probably not carrying one around anyway. Okay, let's go to the next spot. So we're on this little bridge over the train tracks, actually a big bridge, over the train tracks just outside of Ikebukuro Station with tons of trains going by. And we have this awesome railing which makes it great for putting my camera here and then getting a nice long exposure of the trains going by. And the beauty is that the camera is flat, the railing is flat, so everything sits nicely together, nice and steady. I don't have to brace it or do anything tricky. It's very easy, no tripod. Okay. Yeah. Now the camera's doing noise reduction, which takes a little while. There we go. Most cameras, I think, including this one, is when you do a long exposure, the camera will also, after the fact, do long exposure noise reduction. So when let's say the photo was 8 seconds long, at the end it'll take another 8 seconds to do the long exposure noise reduction. So your total exposure time is 16 seconds, right? There we go. So you see the light is off, and now in a moment the photo is done, and now it's going to blink. When it's blinking, it's doing the long exposure noise reduction. I'm pretty confident that's an option that can be turned off, but I leave it on because I find it does make long exposures a little bit cleaner in terms of noise. Great. Now that one I felt like I moved the camera a little bit right as I shot it, but it turned out nice. Oh, that's a nice one too. Okay. Excellent. I think I'm going to do one more without tilting, so I put my strap there and I'm taking it out. Just a nice, completely straight one. Just straight out, level with the thing. It helps that I have a flat railing here. So if the railing was rounded off, this would be more tricky. I might have to, you know, hold it with my hands, maybe do slightly shorter exposures. The point is to use your environment and be creative with how you can hold the camera and get long exposure shots without the help of a tripod. Okay everyone, I hope I gave you some ideas for how to use the RICOH GR II for something beyond just the street photography, which is what everybody uses this camera for, including me. But today we used it for some cityscape shots, long exposure shots of the trains, and even some tricky kind of creative stuff with, you know, motion blur and long exposures, okay? We went over the settings and we went over a bunch of ways to position the camera without the aid of a tripod. Of course, you can use a tripod, that makes this all a lot easier. But one of the things that I love about this camera is because it's so small, you can position it in all kinds of creative ways, okay? So please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please leave any comments with any questions you might have. I will be happy to answer them myself. And I'll catch you guys next time.